Happy new month to all our valuable listeners. May this month of May 2026 be a rewarding month for us all. It is a delight to welcome you to a maiden episode of yet another intriguing and contemporary program for this quarter, the second quarter of the year 2026, titled Building Resilient Global Trade Systems. Last quarter, we discussed more on global trade and supply chains. However, this quarter, we'll be going in depth into the fundamentals of building resilient global trade systems. It is Amagate Radio Communications, and I remain your anchor, Titilola Ogunshonu. This episode will be opening with a blunt truth. A system optimized for a calm world faces or falls into a turbulent one. For over 3 decades, we had a clear playbook, which include, cost reduction strategies by a lot of organizations, lean inventory adopted by various organizations across the globe. We had global supplier, and this actually really worked globally. Between 1995 and 2018, global trade volumes grew about 2.4 times faster than that of gross domestic product, the GDP, and the average tariff reduced from about 9% to 3%. However, this same level of efficiency generated bitterness, and boom, we came into the COVID era in 2020, and reports revealed that about 94% of Fortune 1000 companies reported supply chain disruptions, and the World Bank recorded a 5.3% contraction in global trade volume. This is said to be the sharpest decline since 2009. The same system that made the modern world possible has also made it fragile. Interestingly, we'll be figuring out in this quarter how nations can build systems that wouldn't snap under pressure. The OECD counted about 400 significant trade disruptions between 2010 and 2022, and the rate doubled that of previous decades. We have issues like climate events, we have cyber attacks, geopolitical tension. Are we black swans anymore? In fact, they are the weather. Recently, with inter-regional trade making up to about 51% of trade in Asia and over 60% in Europe, there exists a clear pattern. Companies aren't abandoning global trade, rather they are adding local and regional options. This is the reality that companies in various nations across the globe would have to build resilient global trade systems. So this episode, what we'll be doing today in the next couple of minutes, is that we're laying the basic foundation. We'll be looking at views on the concept of global trade, looking at the main types of global trade, key features or characteristics of global trade. Of course, we'll go into the main pillars of global trade, and we'll take some empirical evidences across the globe on global trade. So we'll start with looking at various views of global trade. When we say global trade, what do we mean? This involves the exchange of goods and services across international borders. It involves the expansion of market for different countries. Another name for global trade, mostly used interchangeably, is international trade, and it works through a flow of huge complex supply chains. How you could source your raw materials from a particular country A, you could source it from Africa, a country in Europe or Africa, and in reality you are going to be manufacturing in another country, and of course again the goods or the services you are going to render will be needed in another country. So you realize that this actually goes through a flow of complex supply chains. The global trade or international trade allows consumers and nations to be to be exposed to goods and services that are not available in their own countries, or that could be more expensive in their countries, that could be more expensive that are produced domestically. So due to global trade, international trade, you have products from all over, from various nations coming into your country, and sometimes they come at reduced cost. That is one of the merits, advantages of global trade. And the reality is that due to global trade, and we have some products or services that could come into your own country at a far cheaper rate. One of what it does is that it drives competition. It makes global trade competitive, and there are a lot of factors that will come into play when you talk about global trade. You have issues like currency exchange rate. You look at trade laws, government policies, the market conditions, and an economy of each participating country. And that's global trade for you. Anytime you have exchange of goods, services, across international borders, you're speaking to international trade or global trade. And there are three main types of global trade that we'll be looking at now. We'll look at what we call the export trade or import trade, or the entry port trade. When we say export, we are talking about exchange of goods and services across our international borders. This means that you are selling of goods and services from your country to buyers in other countries. So if you're in the US and you're producing a good, or you're offering a service, and you are making that product available to another country in Europe, for instance, we are talking about export trade. And in export trade, in export operations, the exporter's day-to-day work, the operational work is actually guided by buyers' requirements, majorly guided by buyers' requirements. So anytime you have export trade, exchange of goods and services, when you mean selling of goods and services from your country to buyers in other countries, okay, and majorly likely it could be guided, the day-to-day work could be guided by the buyer's requirements. So when we talk about import trade, what are we referring to? We are talking a buying of goods and services from another country for domestic use, processing, or resale. So if I am in Europe and I'm in Denmark, and I'm buying a product from South Africa, for instance, that's import trade. And it is said that operationally, import could trigger a few predictable work streams like the supplier, the coordination, documentation, alignment. Of course, you also have issues like customs clearing, planning, the duty or tax readiness when you're talking about import trade. Now, we've spoken about export trade, that is selling of goods and services from a country to buyers in other countries. And we have also mentioned the import trade, that's when you are, buying of goods and services from another country to your country, either for domestic use, processing, or resale. Is that all to it? No, we also have the entry port trade. That is a combination of export and import, okay? Export and import, and sometimes also known as re-export. And what this is all about is it involves importing goods from one country and exporting to another country after adding some value to it. So I'm importing raw materials, okay, from Kenya. I'm adding value to it, in Malaysia, and I'm exporting those goods to another country in Europe, okay? That is entry port trade. You see a combination of both import and export. And why is global trade important? What are the key features of global trade? I've said we start with the basics, because we were talking about building a resilient global trade system. Then let's talk about what global trade is. That we just, like I said, we're talking about the basics, the fundamentals. We start with this on today's episode. So let's move to the features of global trade, or what a lot of people also term international trade. One of the key features of global trade is that it has a large-scale operations are at a large-scale basis. Okay, operations are usually conducted on a very large scale, from production to marketing, and sales activities are usually massive because it's going to involve a volume. It's more about the volume. That is one of the features of global trade. International trade, which is unlike what we talk about, the domestic trade. Another is that it has heterogeneous markets. What we mean is that buyers from various nations will differ in taste, belief, purchase behavior. Okay, you could have white consumers or buyers in a country like the United States could have the tendency to change consumable durables frequently, regularly when they have that habit, the culture of changing. We could have, some consumers or buyers in some nations like a developing country like Nigeria who are less likely to do same with such level of frequency. So you realize that the marketing, the trade strategy is going to differ. So we talk about heterogeneous markets. There'll be various buyers, different tastes, belief, cultural practice, purchase behavior will be. In fact, when economists talk about the rationality of consumer behavior, in some places that's a ceteris paribus, in some places it's always higher. The rationality in consumer behavior could tend to be higher in some countries or in some economies or in some nations. That is the second feature of global trade or international trade, heterogeneous markets. The third, which is also important, is that in global trade, you see what we call integration of economies. One of the benefits of this is that you look at what a nation has in abundance, what they are better skilled at, how do you optimize your returns, what are they good at, what do they have in terms of quality, in terms of quantity, in terms of cost effectiveness. You can integrate all of these things, and global trade allows or gives room for this. Global trade could leverage on economies of various nations. For instance, you could get labor from a particular country. A particular country might have huge labor force, and where the cost is low, then you could get labor from that country. And on the other hand, you could also source from capital from country B. Okay, the country B, the rate of interest on capital could be very low, so you could source capital cheaper, and they could have various markets. The money market, the capital market, that could source money from, and you could also source money from capital B because of the interest rate element. And interestingly, there's another country again that you could get your infrastructure from. One trade that allows you to leverage on integration of various economies, looking at what they do best, where you can get optimally, is international trade. And that is the third feature of international trade, integration of economies. And it's always so massive. We could also have a situation where we could have the design of a particular product, for instance, begun in a country A, and you have parts that could be produced in more than 2 or 3 countries, different from where the design has actually been done. And of course, an assembling could also be in another country H, for instance, and why sales will take place in different countries. That is integration of various economies that global trade gives room for. And you realize another feature is that international trade or global trade is usually often dominated by developed countries and multinational corporations. Well, subsequent episode will look at what are those factors, intensely, deeply, what are those factors that allows them, that are multinational companies, to dominate global trade. And we have few factors I'll just mention briefly, we're not going to it now, like large financial base, top-notch technology and research and development. So, and research has proven that multinational corporations from the United States, Europe, Japan seem to be among those dominating global trade. Another future of global trade is that though it's dominated by developed nations, all participating countries in global trade would benefit from it, whether developing, whether it is developed nations, multinationals. Every participating country would still derive some form of benefit from the trade. Realize that for developing economies, when companies, when you import, when they come into your country, you realize that you still enjoy an increase in employment opportunities. Of course, you also have an increase in industrial development, and once that an increase in industrial development, an increase in your employment opportunities means there'll be more money in circulation. When people are employed, the marginal propensity to consume is likely to be high. Aggregate demand in the nation is likely to be high. When people have money, they're working, employment opportunities. When it is high, then expectedly people can purchase more. When people purchase more, companies can produce more. And of course, when companies can produce more because there's an increase in aggregate demand, definitely is going to increase the productive capabilities of the nation. And when that happens, even for developing economies, developing nations, what you will see is that there'll be an increase in GDP, the gross domestic product, and that's the advantages, the merit that developing nations could get from global trade. So you see that even though we could have developed nations, multinationals, MNCs, dominating global trade, every participating country seems to still have some benefit to derive from global trade. Is there any other feature I'd like to mention? Yes, it is that global trade gives special attention, importance to science and technology. We mentioned that it's on a large scale. So one is on a large scale. How do you connect with your customers better? How do you connect with your supply chain well? How do you synchronize all of these operations seamlessly? Of course, you realize that you cannot do away with high-end technologies, and research has also proven that developed countries have been able to dominate the global trade, international trade, through the deployment of high-end technologies. And of course, the last one, the eighth one that I'm going to mention, is that global trade, as we give the opportunity to earn forex. Of course, for exchange, a country will be able to earn forex. If you're just joining us, thank you so much for joining. We'll take a quick commercial break and we'll be right back. Please stay tuned. Yes, thank you so much for staying tuned. We are back. It's a quick commercial break. If you are just joining, as I said, thank you so much for joining on this maiden episode of our new program series titled Building Resilient Global Trade Systems. And you have not missed a lot. We're just trying to lay a bit of foundation, or laying a bit of foundation to this program series. Okay, and we were talking about various definitions of global trade, and we also established that most times people use when you talk about global trade, we also refer to international trade. These words are used interchangeably often by a lot of business entities across the globe. And we've spoken about some key characteristics of key features of global trade. Now we'll be talking about some pillars. Okay, there could be a lot of pillars, but we're talking about three main pillars of global trade. The first pillar is what we call the regulatory environment. The second pillar is the market access, and the third pillar is trade finance. I'll take it again. There are three main pillars of global trade. We have the regulatory environment, we have the market access, and we equally have the trade finance. I will take it one. We just explain a bit. We'll not go in depth. It's the maiden episode, remember. Okay, but we'll take it one step at a time. What we mean when we say regulatory environment, what we mean when we take market access, and what we mean when we say trade finance, briefly. Okay, and the regulatory environment, this forms the governance foundation for international trade activities. It includes many regulatory dimensions, and these would vary significantly across countries and trade blocks. We have issues like the trade policies, customs regulations, compliance frameworks, import export regulations, product standards, everything to do with regulations that will regulate how trade is done, regulate what comes into the country, what goes out from a particular country, compliance, what do you have to comply with, the rules, the regulations, policies, the standards. It depends. Various organizations, various nations, across the globe have their own documentation, their own compliance frameworks, and this is quite important. One of the pillars of global trade. And most times you see countries, nations, you see government of various countries coming up reviewing trade policy in order to make trade easy. Talking about ease of doing business in a particular country. If it's too stringent, if the bottlenecks are huge, you will not have a lot of people coming into that country to trade. Okay, so that's why sometimes we talk about us reviewing, and we also have the ease of doing business index. Okay, we want to look at all of these factors, and these pillars are some of the factors, the metrics for measuring if your country or nation is one that gives the enabling environment for businesses, like foreign businesses, foreign trade to thrive. So regulatory environment is very key, is very important, is crucial. We'll talk about the second pillar, and that is market access. For market access, the second pillar is looking at the ability of a firm to enter and operate in foreign markets. It looks at issues like tariffs, quotas, trade agreement that enables market entry. We look at the bilateral, regional, and multilateral trade agreements. Also talk about the non-tariff barriers that determine the ease and cost of entering foreign markets. And the reality of today's business world, is that for successful market access, you see a lot of strategic alliances and partnerships emerging. You see that it's more of a world of collaboration. You see that strategic alliances and partnerships would help to provide local market knowledge, distribution networks, and relevant resources needed to enter new markets. So because if you are coming in as a foreign country and you get partnership with a domestic firm, a local firm that's well grounded, that understands the market terrain, the dynamics of the economy well, you will not be reinventing the wheel. You would not be entering new waters unguided. So you see a lot of strategic alliances taking place in order to assess the market strategically and optimally. We have an example of Walmart partnering the JD.com in China, and what Walmart actually did was to leverage on JD.com's local expertise and infrastructure, and that's what we're speaking to. If you are coming to a market, want to leverage on that local expertise and infrastructure, and this would ultimately help to reduce time and resources that could have been invested in entering new markets, on your own entirely. And of course, in market access, research has also shown that digital transformation plays a vital role in this. And the third pillar is the trade finance. It involves the use of financial instruments, products, and services that promote global trade. It encourages timely payment to exporters for goods and services. And according to WTO report, approximately 80 to 90% of global trade relies on trade finance. We always say that finance is the lifeblood of any market. When we talk about even the capital market, the stock exchange market, we do say that the finance is the lifeblood. So definitely finance is the lifeblood of market. So trade finance plays a major role. No wonder is the third pillar of global trade.
At Armor Gates Training, we believe professional development should do more than inform. It should transform how people work, lead, and deliver results. That's why we support organizations through conceptual insight, practical learning, and performance evaluation right at the intersection of leadership, strategy, and institutional transformation. Our approach focuses on practical learning format that professionals can immediately apply in their workplace. At Armorgate, we don't teach theory alone. We equip participants with real-world insight drawn from almost 2 decades of organizational transformation experience. Our programs combine multiple learning methods designed for real-time measurable results. Through seminars, we facilitate deep conversation on key subjects. Using group exercises, participants collaborate, reflect, and think strategically. With case studies, they then sharpened analytical and decision-making skills using real industry scenarios. Through relevant videos, we spark insightful discussions using relatable real-life context. All in all, every participant develops an individual work plan, ensuring the learning turns into real action after the program. Our training programs are hosted in world-class venues across global cities, including Addis Ababa, Nairobi, Mombasa, Cape Town, Dubai, Singapore, Kuala Lumpur, London, Florida, and Washington, D.C. Let's work with you to turn learning into your organization's growth. For more inquiries, call +234 807 9574 151 or WhatsApp +1 610 504 6026. Visit www.thearmorgate.org. Follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn at Armorgate. Armorgate Training, transforming knowledge, interaction, and growth.
Well, before we wrap it up on this episode, let's take some facts about global trade. Trade has significantly expanded access to goods and services across the globe, especially benefiting low-income households. This is a fact, and it remains a major engine for job creation for a lot of countries, economies across the globe. According to OECD report, in the United States, about 8% of the workforce, that is roughly about 12 million people, are involved in producing goods and services designed for export. That's high. In France, it's said to be about 20%. In Germany, it's said to be about 26%. In Ireland, that is said to be about 53%. And all these figures reveal the importance of global trade for smaller and open economies. Global trade, hit a record of about $35 trillion last year in the year 2025, according to UNCTAD report. That's about a 7% increase within a year. And whether we like it or not, we cannot take away that geopolitics is reshaping trade flows. Okay, the recent conflicts and tensions are directly disrupting trade flows. For instance, we have energy prices projected to increase by 24% this year due to the Middle East conflict. We also actually saw that, and we also felt that across the globe. According to the Guardian report, oil nearly hit about $120 per barrel, impacting both inflation and also shipping costs. Okay, in fact, UK export to Middle East was said to have dropped about 20% as well, while trade between developing countries reached about 6.8 trillion in 2025. And what we have seen is that over 40% of developing country export now go to other developing economies, trading among themselves. The reality of what we see is that global trade seems no longer majorly dominated by the US-Europe route. Of course, we also have regional shift. We have East Asia export growing about 9 to 10%, and we also have intra-regional trade, that is trade within region, is also on the rise globally. We see that there's a signal that trade is becoming more regionalized. Of course, we have experts speak to us. We're discussing on this, empirical evidence on the fact that trade is gradually becoming more regionalized. And according to Reuters, China's clean energy tech clean tech export is also on the rise. You see that the new trade battleground seems to be more to be the batteries, the EVs, the solar and green tech. That's what we see. Of course, there's still some hidden risk. We have rising debt, we have higher shipping and energy costs, and we see that developing economies also becoming more vulnerable. Of course, there are also shocks in what we have seen. Okay, is that trade is bigger than ever. Of course, however, growth is slowing down significantly, and we see trade systems fragmenting into blocks. And of course, we're seeing that the traditional drivers are being replaced by AI and green tech. Okay, thank you so much for staying tuned. We wish we could take more. This is all we can take. You see that we have a whole lot to learn, to the scores to learn from, to questions to ask, a lot to enjoy this quarter. Okay, I hope you join us same time next Friday. It's 5 p.m. WAT. My other colleagues are back with interesting contemporary themes this quarter we are going to learn from. If you have any questions, suggestions for us, the mail to send your suggestion or question to his contact at thearmorgate.org. Remember that global trade isn't collapsing, rather is being rewired. So let's go on the journey of the rewiring process together to unravel the factors behind the rewiring. Till I come your way to your device same time next Friday. Please stay blessed and do enjoy this new month of May. I remain Titola Ogushona saying bye from here.
Armorgate, founded in 2008 out of a desire to build transgenerational structures for organizations, institutions, and nations. We have worked with large businesses, international development organizations, and public sector ministries and agencies. Armorgate, our uniqueness is that we do not just work for you, we work with you. For example, we do not leave you to the task after sourcing talent that will help the new hire settle into robust leadership development programs. We are technical experts in advising and supporting institutions on strategy and leadership, artificial intelligence, strategic human resource management, public sector reform, finance, audit and tax, FAT, and strategic communications. We do all this and more out of a desire to transform nations through institutions and organizations. For further inquiries, email contact@thearmorgate.org or call +234 810 999 6666, +234 807 957 4151, and +161 0504 6026. www.thearmorgate.org. Armorgate, building to endure and transforming nations through institutions and organizations.